Section 23 of the Labor Act 11 of 2007 deals with annual leave. For purposes of this section, ordinary work week means the number of days per week ordinarily worked by an employee. Every employee is entitled to at least 4 consecutive works annual leave with full remuneration in respect of each annual leave cycle. So this means that the ordinary work week, or the days that you work per week, is used to calculate the number of days that one is entitled to as their annual leave. So if you work for 6 days per week, then you are entitled to 24 days of annual leave. If you work for 5 days, then you're entitled to 20 days of annual leave. If you work for 4 days per week, then 16 days annually. If we work for 3, then it's 12. Then if you work for 2 days per week, then it's 8 days annually. Then if you work for 1 day, it's 4 days annually. If an employee, however, does not ordinarily work a fixed number of days per week, maybe today, this week you work 5 days, the other week you work 6, and the other week you work 4 days, then they are still entitled to annual leave, which must be calculated on the basis of the average number of days worked per week over the 12 months prior to the commencement of a new annual leave cycle multiplied by 4. So basically, the average days that you work, weekly average, those are the days that are actually used to calculate what number of leave days you are entitled to annually. The number of leave days referred to in the table that we just discussed may be reduced by the number of days during the annual leave cycle if, on the request of the employee, the employer had granted the employee an occasional leave on full remuneration. An employer may determine when the annual leave is to be taken, provided that it's taken not later than 4 months after the end of the annual leave cycle, and it must not be taken 6 months after or later than 6 months after the end of the annual leave cycle, if before the end of the 4-month period contemplated in paragraph A, the employee agreed in writing to such an extension. So the employer can determine when you can get leave, but it must not be later than 4 months after the end of the annual leave cycle, and it must also not be later than 6 months after the end of the annual leave cycle, provided that there is an agreement between the employee and the employer for such an extension. An employer must pay the remuneration due to an employee in respect of annual leave. So meaning that the employer must still pay that person for days that are taken, meaning that they cannot reduce the salary. They're still entitled to be paid for that leave day. An employer must not require or permit an employee to take annual leave during any other period of leave to which the employee is entitled in terms of the spot. So if you are on public holiday, then it means that you are not on leave. You can't take leave on public holiday. If you don't work on weekends and you take 5 days and one of the days fall within the weekend, then it means that you need to take the Monday off. That day cannot be calculated as a deduction from your annual leave. An employer must grant an employee an additional day of paid leave if a public holiday falls on a day during the employee's annual leave and on which the employee would ordinarily have worked. We have discussed that. An employer must not require or permit an employee to work for the employer during any period of annual leave. So you cannot be expected to work while on annual leave. Except on termination of employment, an employer must not pay an employee an amount of money in substitution for annual leave to which that employee is entitled, whether or not the employee requests or agrees in writing to such payment. So basically what they're saying is leave days that have not been taken cannot be offered to be paid out when you're still employed. They can only be paid out at the termination of your employment, meaning at resignation or at retirement or whatever form of termination of employment, whether the contract comes to an end or whatever it is. But it cannot be paid even if you agree with your employer in writing. You cannot have that kind of agreement where you agree to pay each other out the leave days while you're still employed by such an employer. Thank you. Let's discuss. Let's engage. If you have any query, if you would like to object to anything that I have said, please do so in the comment below, and thank you.